DLD.
Thank you very much for all the invitations.
Good.
Thank you, wonderful. So, Yossi Vardi, he's in form. Hi there. Hello, Mr. Borda. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me back. Quickly to introduce myself. Hi, Maria. I'm Patricia Salves from CNBC. I've been anchoring for CNBC for the past 10 years, and I'm really, really honored to have been invited back here to DLD this time. It's always such an inspiring event, but most of all, it's fun, which I think is really good with a lot of great brains. Now today, Steffi just said, it's a serious panel. It is a serious panel, it is a serious issue, and the reason why it is so serious is not only because of the issue, but because it touches everybody everywhere. Global Challenges is the title of this panel, and Global Challenges is something that has moved a long time away from Wall Street to Main Street, and really touches everybody, every gender, every background, every education. So I think it's going to be great to have 6 boys, great brains here on the panel, who are still being mic'd up in order to pick their brains and ask A, what are the global challenges as far as they see it? B, how are they dealing with it? And how can all of us actually deal with the current global challenges in our little local lives, little inverted commas, no offense taken. And first of all, and last of all actually, how can we turn around global challenges into global opportunities? So I hope we are all mic'd up. I'm going to sit down now and wait for the rest of the gang in order to discuss this very serious issue. Thank you.
Ich glaube, hörst du mich über das Mikro?
That's it.
Jetzt können wir erstmal nichts machen.
Coming.
Okay.
Coming.
Always at the top. Always at the top. That's
And
nice.
always at the bottom also. In this case, at the bottom.
Okay, there's another issue I need to talk to you about before we really kick off, is all of you can participate in this discussion. So I'll leave about 15 minutes before the end of this panel to you. You have a great opportunity, make the most of it, to ask questions, what you are concerned about, or what you actually like or dislike about what people said. So I'm happy if you're going to use this opportunity. The first question I actually would like to pick up with Jim Turley. He's the CEO of Ernst & Young, one of the biggest top business consultancies in the world. And the reason why I want to do that is, of course, because you have the best kind of overview, globally speaking, as well as sectorally speaking, talking about global challenges. Your clients, you as an operating company, tell us what are the biggest ones.
Well, you know, I think we're all facing tons of challenges, and I think I would summarize it as follows. I think that everyone is trying to deal with balancing the short-term challenges with the real long-term trends in the world. And short-term challenges right now are about liquidity, they're about capital, they're about are we being efficient from a cost perspective, are we being very focused on the marketplace. I think the longer-term trends, though, are really about the changing demographic shape of the world, the whole changes and shifts in the capital flows taking place, and the real opportunities. So I think getting that balance right now is going to be important, the short term and the long term.
Okay, short term and long term I think is a very important issue, especially with companies such as GE, one of the biggest conglomerates in the world. Nanni Becalo, he's the international CEO of GE. I think the whole balance between short term and long term, is it being tipped right now? Do you have to kind of put away the long term and sacrifice that for the short term?
No, I think the must is not to sacrifice the long term because what is happening in the short term. We are going through a very difficult period of time right now. I mean, you open the newspapers and you can see it. And I think that all of us who are in business, who have responsibility for companies, have to keep in mind a certain number of rules which are important. And I'm just going quickly through it. I think the first one is we need to keep the company safe, which means in the case of GE, because of our composition of the business, we need to maintain the AAA, we need to maintain our cash position, we need to have a very high level of integrity, because in a moment like this, when it is clear that if you make mistakes in that area, you're going to pay very dearly. The second one is performance. There is no question about the fact that particularly you will always have to perform, but particularly in a moment like this one, you have to perform and perform very well. The third one, and I reflect to your consideration, is continuous investment in the future. And what does it mean? It means point number one, technology. You cannot decrease the investment of technology because we are in a difficult time, but guess what? Difficult times will be over, and so we start living again, and we have to have the base of investment there. The second one is globalization. Again, I'm talking about a company like ours, but to be able to expand across the various areas, countries, is very important. And then the fourth point is really the one of continuing to maintain a high level of communication and continue to motivate the people, because, you know, it is important to keep people motivated with a clear vision for the future in a moment like this one.
Now, diversification has always been one of the issues mentioned when you say, okay, you have some kind of problems in one country or in one sector of your business, so you diversify, so that will actually balance out any kind of areas, geographically speaking, or from a product point of view, in another area. Herman Ude, CEO of DHL, let me just quickly ask you about diversification in general, because Deutsche Post tried to diversify into a market, into the US market, which is a tough market, and this kind of balancing out of possible, you know, an opportunity turned out to be everything but opportunity. So it doesn't always mean it's an answer to any kind of challenge, does it?
Yeah, I believe if you look at the history of our group, and we come from the Deutsche Post origin, what we have done is what you wouldn't do according to rule books. We acquired companies in business that we didn't know, in countries that we didn't know. By now we are by far, with 500,000 people, by far the largest and pretty much market-leading logistics company in the world. From around 140 acquisitions that we have done, most of them went well, some went very well, some went okay, and 2 or 3 didn't went well. Now the bad news is that in one of our divisions, in the Express division, the one in the US, didn't turn out well, and this is a pretty significant, has a significant press and a significant impact. So from 500,000 people, we are currently, or pre-Christmas, we had to take out 15,000, which is a lot, but it is not as much as you would think if you look at the press, because that is sort of the topic at hand. Now the interesting thing is that we are diversified in logistics, so we are the only large group that is covering basically 3 big elements, and that gives us a lot of stability now. We have supply chain business, which is a lot of warehousing, truly global, truly market-leading company. We have the air and ocean freight business, which is where we are by far leading the world markets.
But whatever
so
your business is at the moment, basically your main challenge seems to be you try to diversify it into a great, potentially growth market. That growth market was a tough place. You have, you know, other competitors there. Now you have an economic crisis, which makes it very tough. I'm just saying that diversification does not always mean it is 100% kind of key to success or balancing out your business necessarily. Let me just quickly introduce also Kaspar Rohrstedt. He is CEO of Henkel. Everybody knows Henkel from a personal hygiene point of view, at least so I hope. And again, diversification is something that your business, you've got hundreds of products, but the first thing you said coming into the business was, I'm going to streamline all these products. I'm going to really kind of reduce it down to the real sugo of things and still be diversified enough. But at the moment, where do you actually feel the main challenges for your business?
Before I answer your question, I'll answer a different question first. As I learned when I started to take training, interview training, if you don't like the question, you should ask your own one. And that is really...
Thank you.
What is the challenge or the macro challenge? And I very much agree with what Jim said, but I really think the core challenge for any company, and that will increase over time, is people. And it sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but frankly, when we'll look back in 5 or 10 years' time, we'll say that we had a crisis in 9, 10, and perhaps in 11 or whatever, and the companies that will come out as winners will be those who have over time done a better job on the people than those who haven't. And I think that when you look back and you look upon your diary on a normal week or a normal month, and you look how much time goes into forecasting and how much time goes into people management, you will see that 99% is forecasting, 1% is people management, and it's actually the people that are driving your business. And there's an American expression, of course, it takes a very long time to finish something you're not really working on. And I think getting people as the first and the most important priority for any CEO is the one that will make companies succeed.
People and the integrity of people, I'm sure you're referring to.
I don't think, I think that's needless to say, because I think that, and I said that in a recent interview, in school, in the first grade, you learn you can't cheat, you can't take the food from your neighbor, and you can't look at somebody else when they're doing a test, and we think that when adults, then we have different rules that apply. I don't think that's the case. And I actually think if you look upon most code of conducts, there's very few surprises in there. When it comes to diversification or consolidation, I'm a firm believer in that you got to be good at what you do, and you can't be everything to everybody, and that's what we're trying to do at Henkel. Focusing more on what we're doing and get better at what we're doing to close the gap to our competitors.
Now, one of the other big challenges.
Yeah, I'd just like to add something to what he said, because I think he is so right. When you think about the people of the world, the people coming out of universities today, think differently than this assembly of white males sitting up here. They're much more diverse in their background, be it in gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, many differences. They are much more global in their outlook. They actually have a view of the world that outside themselves that is different than we may have when we came out of university. And so I think dealing with the demographic issues and dealing with the people issues is priority number one. It is one of the transformational priorities for Ernst & Young to be the best firm in the world at diversity and inclusiveness. The second, though, and I think is just as important, is the global shifts in capital that Nani referred to. I mean, there is fundamentally going to be a different landscape of the world. We saw how coupled the world is through this financial crisis, as opposed to a year ago we were talking about, are we decoupled? We see how connected we are, but capital is shifting from west to east and north to south and developed to developing at rapid paces. And so that's the other big focus for Ernst & Young.
But I don't want to steal time from the other speakers, but I think that the globalization is influencing the capital flow very much.
Yep.
While on the other side, and I like to comment on what you said about the youth, there is the tendency of more protectionism that is spreading around the world. There is what some economists define as a neo-mercantilism that is developing, and I think that one will be very bad, and I throw that one on the table for further thought.
We're going to pick it up, Nani, as well. Let me just quickly introduce the last two speakers we haven't spoken to yet, and then we kind of get in depth with capital flow, the trust issue, the human relationships, etc. Let me introduce Dr. Stefan Oschmann to you. He's from Merck in the US, that is the healthcare business, and I think you want to also raise one of the key issues, which is demographics, and Jim already kind of talked about that and the healthcare issue going long term. Tell us about it.
The biggest challenge I'm currently dealing with is this headset, which each time I move my head causes this piercing pain.
Okay, maybe we can get that sorted
so
out
if
from
I
the technicians.
if I appear a little bit stiff, so has nothing to do that I'm with Big Pharma. But anyone who works who's worked in Big Pharma for the past 5 years must have developed some pain resistance anyway.
And they take your pain
Or they had a small head. They had a small head.
So our industry has been going through a perfect storm anyway.
that you hold here.
And we have seen that we have had to totally transform our commercial model, our R&D model. And conventional wisdom would say that the current financial crisis would have less of an impact on healthcare. And that is true if you think short term. Of course, we're much less cyclical than other industries. Medicines are not luxury goods exactly. On the other hand, there are two factors where we are very much affected. One is the financing of research. We participate in a tightly knit network with biotech companies, which are often venture capital financed, and otherwise our products are eventually being paid by social systems, tax money, and we'll be seeing that governments will develop austerity plans. So on the other hand, I represent an industry which has to be long-term oriented. If we invest in a certain technology, we do research in a certain disease area, we'll be able to maybe launch a product in 15 years from now. So this balancing question of short-term, long-term, I think is very, very important.
Last one to introduce is Thierry Antinori. He is Worldwide Marketing Manager at Lufthansa. And I think, again, Lufthansa, a little bit, as Jim as well, is on the ground everywhere, is trying to be on the ground everywhere and to take off as well from as many places as possible. And you feel, of course, crisis. But on the other hand, you are in a sector that should have risk management at the top of the agenda every day because you are in a risk kind of exposed sector?
Yeah, it's true. The airline industry is an industry that faced a lot of crises in the last years, 9/11, SARS, oil prices, and it's a kind of challenge now to balance the short term. Short term is protecting the financial fundamentals, like it was already explained, and protecting the existing business, but it's not enough. As a good company, as a company with a strong history, brand, and culture, the real challenge for us is to manage for the long term, to consider this crisis as an opportunity to get out of this crisis stronger than before the crisis, and to get a bigger share of the smaller pie. And if the pie is getting bigger, we will keep the higher share. And what we are doing is quite easy. We protect our cash and our debt structure. We increase the efficiency to protect our business. That I would say is a major to-dos for everybody. And to increase offensively our positions, we continue innovation. We continue to invest in products. We continue to invest in people, knowing that in our business we differentiate through brand and people, because the 747 of the competition, they fly exactly at the same speeds than ours. We invest on business intelligence because a frequent flyer program from Emirates Airline or Qatar Airways or Etihad, they have less participants and members than Lufthansa because we are on a strong market, and the day we deal together with media partners, by the way, like we work with Burda as an example, is very important. So short term, like everybody, long term, opportunity, bigger piece of the smaller sky, people, innovation, product development.
Okay. Now, basically, we've had the round introducing a lot of ideas. I know this is a lot to take on for everybody. Basically, there are so many challenges right now. The worst thing is they're everywhere in every sector, affecting us all, as I said in my introductory speech. But let's talk first and drill a bit deeper on the human side of things. It seems to be a real issue close to the heart of all of my panelists, which I'm very happy about, because this is the basic that every company success depends on, is who drives the company, not only from the top, but of course right until the end. So does it really start, Kasper? You mentioned already the educational system. Does it really start as early as learning in the first grade you're not supposed to cheat, then you go out to the reality and you say, okay, maybe if I don't cheat, I don't get anywhere. So it is a value question.
Of course it is a value question, but I think there are some fundamental things. You can always criticize educational systems. You can argue that kids should start learning at 5, different languages instead of 12. So under the assumption that over time we can get the educational systems right, I think that the companies also carries a tremendous level of responsibility. There's been a lot of criticism about educational systems in Europe, particularly in Germany with PISA, potentially rightly so. But that is how the world is today. I think that as a company or as head of a company, you need to ask yourself, what can I do to make my company better? And very basic things like diversity, which has been spoken about for ages, and very little has happened. Yeah. Look how few foreigners are sitting at the top of different companies. Look how few females are sitting at the top of global companies. And we at Henkel, we do approximately 40% of our business in our emerging markets. We need to make certain that we have the right Chinese, the right Russians, the right Latin Americans at the top of our house, instead of having a Dane or whoever there. Because frankly, if we don't have that, then we can't have the right conversation at the right moment of time. And I think being very structured around that and putting that on the agenda and ensuring and knowing that you actually, as a manager, you're a coach for the team, but you're actually not trying to be the defensive player, the middle field player, and also the offensive player. And I think that is where companies can take a much more active stand, also particularly European companies, in its relation to the educational world, where America is, in my opinion, much more sophisticated, that the connection between big corporations in America and large universities is much closer. We cannot afford that not to happen in countries like Germany, because at the end of the day, the final product that we have is the intellect that this country will produce.
Of course, which also needs a lot of financing, of course. Herman, you wanted to say?
I believe there's an interesting thing to add. There's skill and there's access to market, but there's also something that, especially in times of crisis, is becoming more important, that is trust. Now, in the past, you would say people trust their community, their government. This is right in some places, but this is not true in many other places. People would trust their bank, maybe. Maybe that has been challenged recently. So the question is, what can people trust? And companies, global companies, can do a lot to create something, some confidence and trust for the people that work in that company. And if they feel trust, they can move faster, take risk, and be more entrepreneurial than they could be if they were in different local silo systems. Now we have, in my board, I have somebody from Africa, from Senegal, from Algeria, from China. So I think my team, my management, senior management team is pretty diverse. And if I compare that with other German companies where indeed most of the people come from Germany, and if not from there, they would come from other European or at max US environments. And I feel that this community is building a community in itself, which is sort of DHL. If you have a strong brand and you create that, I think this allows a lot of fast moves in times of crisis, because the volatility is bigger, and the only thing that makes people not nervous if they can trust their company, because they cannot trust many other institutions. So I think companies play a role in creating something that has gone lost in many other environments.
Jim, I think you've got a lot to say about trust.
Yeah, well, I do. And Patricia, you started off asking a question about values as well. You know, just to frame Ernst & Young a little bit, we've got 140,000 people operating in just about 140 countries around the world. And we consider our promise to the public is to deliver seamless, consistent, high-quality service everywhere. And that's a challenge when you have different accounting and auditing systems and regulatory systems and cultures. And so I think values are essential. You know, we have to bridge all the different national cultures with, yes, common methodology and technology and processes, but also common values. And so I think others have hit on it, but I think it is absolutely essential.
So are you talking about trying to create globally common values in order to have like this global setup?
We absolutely do. All of our people ascribe to a common set of values, and they live those values. And in fact, several years ago, I was asked to lend my title, if you will, to a Chairman's Values Award, which is conducted all around the world. And we get literally thousands and thousands of nominations from our people about their peers demonstrating values every day. And so it's incredibly important. I'm sometimes asked what my most important responsibility is. And very simply, I think it's to make sure that all 140,000 of these people wake up every day knowing what's expected of them, knowing what's right and wrong, and more important than that, knowing that nothing is more important than their integrity. If something smells funny at a client they're serving, or if something smells funny inside Ernst & Young anywhere, we want them to know that it's not just okay, but it's their job to raise their hand and ask for help. Ask for someone to say, hey, this seems wrong, let's talk. And it's why I spend all my life traveling around. You don't get that culture by sending out emails to people. You look them eyeball to eyeball, and you have to cascade that.
I think, Nani, you are also very good to talk about actually values and perhaps getting European American values globalized and vice versa, kind of bringing home what the values are in Asia. And you've been, I think, 4 years in Japan as well, knowing exactly about differences in values and how difficult it is to integrate both in order to still have integrity at the end of the day.
Let's start from a very important definition. And this sounds very much like a simple statement, but it's very important, and my 34 years of career with this company have demonstrated it's true. People are the most important asset a company has. I have seen great businesses being ruined by poor people, as I have seen businesses in difficulties being very much improved by great people. So what do we have to do with people? We have to educate them. We have to develop them along their career. We have to make sure that the values of the company are ingrained in all the 140,000, 320,000 people of GE. So it is very, very important people understand immediately from the beginning what are the values that are important for any company. So for us, it is performance and it is integrity. These are the two most important values. These will never change. Now, it is clear that Japanese employees, Russian employees, American employees are going to bring some of their own values, some of their own characteristics to the overall culture of the company, but this is what is promoting the diversity of a large enterprise. It is clear that if we keep the management of a structure, and I agree with you, if we keep the management of a structure being only Italians, for instance, or only Americans, just to make two examples, we will never be able to have that kind of diversity. But in Japan, we need to have good Japanese running Japan. In Argentina, we need to have a good Argentinians, and so on. And that's our philosophy.
You know what, and I want to throw this to any of you who feels happy to answer it, is we talk about integrity, we talk about people being the main assets in a company, we talk about quality being the main driver of any kind of business. So I ask myself, how could have this subprime crisis, this real bad economic crisis, pushing back our ecological long-term challenge, maybe even further, have happened? What happened?
25 years of progress,
Okay.
25 years of growth, 25 years of blossoming of the global economy. People are talking today about regulating the markets and doing all this kind of stuff. Trust me, that's bullshit. The market is a market. I have a product, I offer it in the market. It can be a very complex derivative product, but if I find a person that looks at it and says, a good product, I want to buy it, that is fine. What did we miss in these 25 years? We missed a risk analysis from several different institutions that would have been capable to minimize the risk of some operations. And sometimes you do operations that are risky, and you know and you recognize that there is a risk. We missed the level of integrity that pushed certain people to do certain things that were totally out of the law. And why did we miss the level of integrity? Because the overall governance has not been working. We had several different examples that we can read on the papers today of people that were checked, controlled, rechecked by several different institutions and went by with flying colors. And that is what we miss. So, huge growth, lots of good things happening, poor risk management, loss of ethics inspired by a low level of guidance.
Yeah, I think that in order to have a balanced dialogue, and I find the term balance is very important. When I look upon what has happened, and it's easy to find people that have made mistakes or countries that have made mistakes, and I agree with what's being said, but actually missing a balanced dialogue, particularly in the media, of what the solution is. Because what I see is every day when I read a paper, and I read the papers every day, there are 99.9% bad news in the paper. And even if there's good news, it's never represented in the paper.
You're right, yeah.
And I can tell you as a CEO for a company with 60,000, it has a huge negative impact on the morale in a company. And we as managers have responsibility, politicians have responsibility, but media has also responsibilities to find a more balanced dialogue around it, and also sometimes focus more on the solution. I find, for instance, that what the German government did on creating the quote-unquote package very, very quickly was an extremely good move. And the first that came out was, both from other politicians and the press, was how to criticize this instead of how to operationalize it. And I find it's a missed opportunity.
No,
Patricia, it's your fault.
Yeah, it is my fault. And I've been doing these panels for the past few months, a lot of them, and I've been getting a lot of sticks, so I did get my fair share. And it is true, of course, often the media is only news when it's bad news, and then we put it out. And I've seen, of course, also, part owner of my station is, of course, JE. What's been happening in terms of the procyclicality, if I may say so, of the media and the way we communicate whatever positive or negative news the individual companies have to transmit. Jim, you wanted to add something straight away, Stefan.
Well, just, as Nani talked about what happened and how this happened with 25 years of prosperity, I think what we're all seeing is that bad business decisions, the subprime lending you spoke of, have real consequence and catastrophic consequence. Lending 110% of the value of a home to someone that has low income, if any income, doing little, if any, due diligence, with an expectation that the real estate value was going to go up for the next 25 years because it had for the prior 25 years, is really a sad thing. But that decision wasn't being made globally. I remember sitting with the chairman of the China Bank Regulatory Commission, And in China, at the exact moment in history that the US was making these subprime loans, China was making it harder to buy a home. They were raising the required down payment from 20% to 30%. If it was a second resident, it was 40% or 50%. And so not everybody did this, but through derivatives, through credit default swaps, through a bunch of other instruments, the whole world could buy into it, and buy into it they did. And so I think that a piece of this 25-year boom, people suspended their better judgment, didn't get focused on the risk management Nani spoke about, and it's vital.
And there is, before we let Stefan, talk, there is one thing to consider. 25 years means that there are a ton of leaders and managers out there who today are 45 years old, who have never experienced a crisis.
Right.
They have always been developing their own career on the growth and on the go, and so they got used to certain habits. Not everybody is as old as I am that has seen crisis before the 80s,
but
shall
that
we
also
say.
implies, Nani, that we don't have that many managers actually being able to deal with the beast, the crisis we're seeing right now. And that's not good news.
Education.
Is it?
Sorry, Stefan, if I...
Just a little remark. I think there's, on the one hand, there's this eternal cycle of greed and fear. And mankind has greed and resulting fear, and mankind has been seeing that since the Dutch tulip crisis. I think so. In a sense, there's nothing new. On the other hand, in addition to the topics that we have discussed, diversity and values, I would like to add one more point, and that is transparency. And that is actually, I think it's particularly important in the context of DLD. Technology today provides an unprecedented degree of transparency in many areas. If I look into my own industry, we used to, not many years ago, we thought that clinical data were our property. Nowadays, civil society, academia, researchers have access to our data sometimes earlier than we have it ourselves. So we have to act as an industry, as a company, totally differently. And I think that a lack of transparency was one of the major factors contributing to that crisis. And there's a lot of opportunity in the DLD topics about bringing about more transparency.
Okay, Thierry?
Yes. I think what is very important is to have a kind of stability in crisis. You cannot per decree say, oh, people are very important if the company in its DNA didn't that in the last 20 years. So I think you need stability in a changing environment. But you have never to forget where you are coming from to go where you are going. And even if we look at the future, you cannot change a company values in the mindset of your employees. So I see the winners of tomorrow being people with good financial values, with good existing business. They can protect well, but airline having two things, companies having two things. The stability in order to give orientation to all the important communities, the employee, the customers, and the shareholders. And dimension we didn't speak about now, flexibility. You need stability, but high flexibility, high adaptation. What we are doing with staff, because we have a lot of different models we already experienced in the past, what we are doing with our network, and what we are also doing with different options we have in a merger acquisition, because a crisis is also an opportunity to get bigger through acquisitions. And so I think we are all the same opinion. People make the difference. You cannot copy people, but the companies understanding that today, not having understood that in the last 20 years, won't be successful. The companies being stable, but being able to adapt and being the champions of flexibility and having a good balance sheet will be the winners.
So what you're trying to say is basically once you have the fundamental of your strategy, your long-term outlook, your solidity, you always have to have that element of just adapting to whatever the environment asks.
Yes.
I think it's quite interesting if you combine what Nani said and Stefan said. Now what we see is that we have an unprecedented volatility, and the financial crisis is just the test for the ecological crisis that is coming. I mean, this is the big tsunami, and we see a big wave now, and are all very impressed. Now, if you have humankind is very good in pre-thinking and preparing for linear developments. We are not very good in coping with accelerated developments. Now, if you look at transparency, the speed of technology, the availability of information, everybody with his little BlackBerry, everything knowledgeable, all the information available, that has increased the challenges that come with acceleration. There's an earthquake in China. We are there with the pictures and everything minutes after it happened. The first BlackBerry photos have been shot and sent out. So the challenges are, they hit us much faster and they hit us on a global scope. So we get the information, the transparency somehow is there, and it's a public transparency. It's not so much in the institutions, in the governments. Governments can no longer hide if they discriminate human rights or so. It's just public the moment it happens. And the question is whether our organizations and other organizations, and even more so governments, which have to be elected, have their own cycles, are able to cope with that and to create the speed of reaction and activity that is required. And if you look at what happens now, we need many, many unlike decisions. The crisis needs unlike decisions by politicians, by companies. You have to withdraw investments in certain areas. You have to invest into other areas. You have to increase debt by 700 million. And the question is how we can speed up our information understanding and our taking of decisions to the speed that the information is made available.
But
I think we are not up to it.
A very, very critical point, because I would have referred to what Stefan said before, especially in this DLD context where, of course, the digital dimension of everything, the cyber dimension, is so important. Instant information everywhere. He says transparency is utmost important to any kind of chance in the future or any kind of doing business. However, at the moment, it turns out one of the biggest challenges to have exactly that speed of information everywhere that us humans have to react in a human kind of speed, i.e. how can we be reactive so quickly as data transmissions? Well, we can't. We are humans.
Yep.
We've been created millions of years ago. But in that sense, what I'm saying is I think the challenge, we are kind of being out-challenged by what we created in terms of information transmission and our ability, physical ability to react.
But Caspar gave the answer. Be close to the people. Because you cannot steer it, you don't have the brain in your head office that would tell you this is exactly the direction, this is how 500,000 people in our case have to march.
That means also you need to be cohesive, and how can you get that kind of, I mean, I know from our corporational structure how much red tape there is, how many kind of other people you have to get involved into a decision to make a decision. If it was just me and the information, I can react, but I have to go and discuss,
Committee here, committee there.
Oh. Yeah, exactly, and then
that is not true.
And most importantly, the stock in the meantime.
No, but Patricia, I want to talk about the stock for a second, because I think the ability to communicate with your own workforce is much better than the ability to communicate with your investors and the outside public. And one of the issues around speed and the digital availability of information is there theoretically is the possibility to not report information quarterly or semi-annually, but in theory, there's the technology available where people can, and investors can self-select what they look at when they look at. It's a whole complex regulatory issue on the one hand. It certainly adds to the importance of strong systems of internal control, but it's something that there is great discussion going on. The profession has hosted a series of roundtables with investors, regulators, board members, and whatnot from across the globe. And the issue of timely reporting and access to even more instantaneous information is on their minds. Where this is going to go is still years out, but it's something that is I think, going to be in our future.
Yeah, you're completely, yeah, sorry.
I think you have to distinguish who's putting red tape in place, as the regulators or as the companies, and I think all large companies are equally guilty of putting red tape in place along with the regulators. And I come back to the point that he made before, about who will make the decision and who should take decisions. If we speak about Asia, I can get the sales numbers every day, but that doesn't mean I can make an intelligent decision about Asia. That intelligent decision has to be made by the person that can interpret the numbers and know how the market is and know how the structures are. So it doesn't replace the human element. It gives me a fact base, but it doesn't mean it gives me the capability to make the decisions. And I think a lot of companies make that mistake and believes that globalization means centralization. Globalization means something very different. Transparency means something very different. It means you can take decisions at different places. It doesn't mean that globalization means that you take all decisions centrally. I think getting the right people at the right places is essential in this world.
I think there is no...
Oh, we can't get to you,
sorry.
Just
1 minute.
speak.
Thank
Just
you.
speak.
I do not believe in globalization. I believe in glocalization. This is global issues plus local issues. Sorry, Stefan.
I just wanted to mention that I believe that technology creates a new hierarchy in who's being trusted. Institutions are much less trusted right now. I spoke to the founder and CEO of Sermo recently. Sermo is sort of the Facebook for physicians. And they rank their individual members in terms of what kind of recommendations they got. And he told me the highest ranked individual on Sermo is a person who has a ring through his nose and has a tattoo of a red dragon coming up on his neck, and he is not even a professor anywhere.
He's right over there. I think.
This person is one of the most trusted medical experts in the US of A, despite hardly anyone knowing him personally.
His domain expertise.
So working with these new eminences, these new hierarchies, which challenge traditional business, is, I think, at the end of the day, a very interesting opportunity for us, and it may be a means to restore trust.
Herman, we've now been talking about basically the human social dimension or challenges, integrity, etc. We have been talking about the economical challenges, the ecological challenge. When we kind of discussed a little bit the pre-brief, you said, I think the big one is around the corner. Forget about the economic challenge. It's a cycle that comes, that goes. But the real one is the ecological challenge. I mean, to what extent the sustainable kind of setup of any kind of company will be now sacrificed, and how bad can it be? And is it being ignored right now through this crisis, this long-term ecological challenge?
So I believe, and our company believes, that the climate change will come. It will hit us, our economies, our civil societies full, and we just can only full speed try to do what we can do, and we cannot do much, and we are very slow at it. We are slow at it because we don't have that speed of reaction that we should have. Whoever tries to educate a devoted smoker into a non-smoker knows what it takes to educate a devoted carbon dioxide producer into a non-carbon dioxide producer. It's a big educational and factual challenge. We don't have the facts ready. There's a lot of distortion. And we try to educate our people. We try to develop some products. I think GE has done quite an exciting job on developing products specifically for green challenges. And of course, we have to make our products greener. We are a logistics company, so most of the things we do is burning fuel for air freight, for ocean freight, for trucking. So we have a serious challenge ahead. That's why we, as a company, committed as the first logistics company to a 30% reduction target. But even if you do that, there, as I said, we are not good at extrapolating or extrapolating challenges. Now, the real challenge, if Netherlands would be flooded by a big flood coming, is not that we couldn't cope somehow with it's a challenge to the civil societies, to the democracy. What will Europe do if 6-7 million refugees from Netherlands come into Europe? What would India do if 40 million refugees from Bangladesh come into India? What would China do if Shanghai was suddenly and we had a little test on that in New Orleans. Suddenly it's Wild West and it's 3,000 people killed on the streets, not by the hurricane, but by gangs and what you have, burning fires and things that came with it. So I believe that's why we have to take it serious, because the big challenge will not be that everything is swamped and everybody of us is standing in water up to here, but the challenge is that our civil societies will be challenged, and that's why we have to create societies in our companies, educate people.
I think this is a very interesting and provocative kind of aspect to bring into the discussion, that looking even beyond the ecological challenge, becoming then a social or democracy kind of challenge. Do you gentlemen agree? Anybody putting forward an idea here?
That
basically the ecological challenge is A,
well,
honest, and B, that the consequences are not on our poor trees or whether we're going to have some storms, but we're going to have a social
Well, it is clear that one of the biggest challenges in the next many years is going to be the protection of the environment. It is clear that any changes in the environment is going to create huge social problems. I'm not so sure that any of us, anywhere, has the answers. I do believe, and we do believe at GE, that technology is one big answer, and it is one component of all the answers. I mean, we never model situation like you're describing, like, for instance, Shanghai being destroyed or that kind of stuff. Maybe we should, because it might happen. But on the other side, there has to be the commitment from all the constituencies, being the government, which is very important because there is a need of some regulation, the enterprises, private, public enterprises, to be able to invest the time and the money to develop that. I think we are beginning at GE to do it. We have a major campaign that is focused at creating a technology which is directed at protection of the environment. I don't go into the details of this one, but just worth to notice that companies like ours and many others are already involved in it.
Jim, sustainability.
Yeah.
Is this an issue being put off right now during the crisis, or is this something that is an integral part of any kind of cooperation?
Well, I think you are hitting on one of the worries I have as we start coming out of this crisis. Because I do think that there is a risk that companies and or governments can divert their attention from the environmental sustainability issues. And so that's something that I think we have to be very careful not to do as we try to recover from this economic times. Just as important, though, I think we've got to be darn careful that no country retrenches into protectionism, because I think there is a very human reaction of political and government leaders to say, let's withdraw from the global economy in an effort to protect our people. Just as big a risk is if governments get too used to owning banks, too used to owning institutions. I don't think long-term government ownership is the right answer. I guess the last thing I worry about is when there is the re-regulation of business that's going to take place coming out of this crisis. I'd be very worried that that re-regulation gets too binding, too stifling, and squeezes out innovation and entrepreneurship. Because you gotta have that to get
Patricia,
out.
Patricia, I have a question for you. Let's see how it goes. We need to bring hope and motivation to this large group of people that comes over here on a Sunday afternoon to listen to us. For the time being, we've been talking about disasters. We've been talking about ecological disaster. We've been talking about a crisis which is upon us and is going to take some time before it's going to pass. Why don't we talk about something positive?
I was just about to come to that one. We've got exactly 15 minutes here. Fantastic. Of course, as I said in my introductory speech, after challenges comes opportunities. So let's start with that, and then within the next 5 minutes, I would like to also get the audience involved as much as possible. We do have flying mics, so please just raise your hand and we'll get to you. What is the world going to be like? What should it be like? What is the circuit breaker of the current situation everywhere, on every level? Is this Obama? Everybody is putting Obama as one of the big circuit breakers.
Makes it simple.
There we go, for example. Or is it going to be, where's the trust coming from? So where's the opportunity? Let's start talking about opportunity.
I strongly believe it's people, it's education, it's making people react quicker to challenges. I think that's the key thing. That, I mean, we are a service company, we have no big technologies there, but that's what we really try to focus on. Make our people trusted, make them more reactive to challenges, whatever comes. And I think they have it in themselves. And if we make it come out, then we will overcome many, many big tsunamis.
Okay, other opportunities, pockets of strength?
I don't believe that there's any one answer, but sustainability is a good element to the answer. When people say sustainability is very important now because of the crisis, actually I think that's wrong. I think sustainability is important, period. The same as ethics, it's important, period, irrespective of a crisis. And I think a lot of companies and a lot of governments are doing a lot in moving it forward. I think the consumers have done, have changed their behavior substantially over the past 10 years of demanding sustainable products. So I'm less, I don't want to be a doomsday or print a doomsday scenario because I don't think there will be one. I think having a long-term view, which we've spoken about, dealing with the problems when they arise, but don't, showing panic, getting governments involved and making the right decisions, but at the same time also not getting overly eager in trying to regulate everything, because at the end of the day, regulation in certain areas does not help business, it actually prevents business. But having the longer term view, having a calmness and also explaining there will be a year after 2009. I think in one great American novel that said tomorrow is another day. Keeping that mindset, but being realistic all the time.
Yeah, I think the issue is also, I'm happy you want to talk about positive stuff, but you've been seeing that credibility and the trust issue is some big stumbling block right now. So you coming out, of course, talking about a lot of positive things, about sustainability, the long-term issue, long-term growth, which is still there, but you're stumbling over credibility in the marketplace over and over again. So
let's talk a moment about, yeah, there is a question down there, but Patricia, I apologize, just let me take this one second. I do believe that people will win. I do believe, as it was reflected in many of the conversations, that people are the most important part. And let me spend 30 seconds to describe your situation. I was sitting in Terminal 3 of Beijing Airport last April. I go there quite often, and I was in the Lufthansa lounge. And, we used always to divide the world into developing countries and developed countries, with a kind of developing countries being underlings, like this. And I'm sitting there, and there is this gentleman, this Chinese gentleman in front of me. He is perfectly dressed. He has got his Lenovo personal computer. He has got the Chinese equivalent of a BlackBerry. And he has got a telephone there. And I'm looking at him. And, oh, by the way, a beautiful briefcase besides him. And me being Italian, I do pay attention to these kind of things. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm saying, this is in China, he's a Chinese, but this is not developing. This is fully developed. This is a guy that is a New York or a London kind of guy. While I'm thinking that, there is a woman that is passing by, and she has got all the labels that you can think of, Versace, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and so on. And again, being an Italian, I do pay attention to these kind of things. And I look at this woman, and I draw the same kind of conclusion. So I'm thinking about it, and I'm saying, can you imagine if I am here in Terminal 3, and I'm so unlucky that I'm going to fly to JFK. I was coming to Frankfurt, so it was a different situation. I would have a very difficult time to decide which one is the developing country and which one is the developed country.
You're right.
For those of you who have gone through JFK.
Would be easy, actually.
So I thought I'm done. I thought that the really great divide that there is in the world is not anymore this developing kind of concept, which is out of fashion, but the line of demarcation is appended by education. In China, you have 400 million people that are very well educated, that are living like we live here. You have 900 million that are living in developing countries. As well as in the United States, maybe there are few people here and there in some corners who are not really living up to standard of a developed country. So, people and education. And now I apologize for the long story.
Thank you very much. First question down here. And then, yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Wonderful. There's the mic already. You have that? You have a question as well?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, I have just a question to James Turley. It's concerning trust and confidence you were talking about. When I see what happened in the stock markets, I think we have to put also some functional mechanisms in there. I think that's caused also by digital elements. I was sitting in the night, the 26th of October, with my little daughter in front of the stock market. I told her we would see something very interesting tonight. And what did we see? We saw, for example, the stock of AIG beaten down by naked shorting with transactions of 300 billion stocks. It's totally virtual, this number, because all stockbrokers of the world couldn't trade so much stock. It was computer mechanisms, naked shorting, sales by computers. Don't we have to impose something on naked shorting on one hand, a functional mechanism? The second is, we deprive banks of their minimum reserves. 15 years ago, banks had till 10% of minimum reserves. Today we have 1 or 0.5%. Don't we have to do something really functional and not only talk about trust and confidence, but really to impose something on the people?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of elements to your question, and the issues around naked short selling are very complex, and it's one that regulators the world over are actually trying to get their arms around. On the one hand, there is a strong belief in most of the capital markets of the world that the free market ought to be able to operate. On the other hand, we've seen the dislocation that's taken place from some of the short selling. So I think you're seeing regulators come to grips with this. As for the capitalization of the banks, I think was your second question. It's a little hard to hear up here. One of the things that I think is been increasingly discussed is how or whether in these times the bank supervisory authorities should look at only IFRS or GAAP capital to drive the required reserves, or whether there's some other mechanism, some other vehicle that they should look at. It ties into a whole debate around fair value and mark-to-market accounting, but the preponderance of view is that from an accounting perspective, that is very much around showing a point in time, fair value is the right way to go. It's the best for the investors to have a snapshot, but the regulators, having a safety and soundness view, might want to take a different view.
Okay, next question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Axel Schmiegel from Severnode. We're a social media site that runs in 8 different countries. As a startup, we were always oriented towards the US. We're very excited by Obama having won the election, on top of it with social media. At the same time, we are operating in Asian countries where we suddenly realize, wait a minute, the dynamics and the structure of those markets differ very strongly from our dominant paradigm. You said rightly that the so-called developing world is developed and has a huge market impact, a huge market volume. Now, we all in the Western world like stability. We've gotten used to a certain kind of stability in the past 40 years. The framework in those markets is not being set according to the rules and whatever, I have a strong belief in Obama, but even by the president of the world, so-called, it's not being set by the Western world anymore increasingly. And it's set according to very different values and very different forces than the ones we're used to. Do you see a return to stability, and what do you think we should do to get an international framework of rules that everyone can agree to?
You have a very good point, and it's a very important point for somebody that, like you or many others, is operating in different countries with different kind of social, economic, and political structure. The way you deal, let's pick up the example of China. We were talking about Beijing before. The way you work in China is much different from the way that you work in the United States, and I'm sure that my colleagues here can agree with that. In China, the government is, anything happens with, through, or with a nod of the government, because it's involved in all major decisions that are happening. Everything is on a 5-year plan and so on. When you work in the Western world, the private enterprise takes over and it is much more prominent. Now, what do we have to do? Well, we have to learn how to operate into different environments. I keep on saying in my company that we need to learn to be more Chinese than the Chinese. What does it mean? It means to be very much local, to invest a lot of money in China. It also means to be able to work through with the government, which for us is a different skill because we come from a culture that has not been bred in that way. If you go, for instance, in the Middle East, where the decisions are taken by one single person and few others that are part of the entourage, you still have to operate in a different way. So what is going to happen? The process of globalization is bringing a process of democratization around the world. We see that China has moved from a certain type of structure to a certain other, which is a bit more liberal, and it continues to progress, and we should compliment them for the progress that they are doing, and we should encourage them to keep on moving forward. Does it mean that in the future we'll all look alike, look the same? I don't know. I doubt it, to be honest with you. But I think that we are converging toward a certain kind of point. On the other side, you see that as a response to the crisis that is happening today, the governments are taking over. So you see that all these stimuli that have been introduced are all connected with some kind of restriction for the people, for the companies that are receiving the stimuli. So this is also part of becoming a more controlled kind of economy. By all means, it's not a controlled kind of economy, but it converges toward a certain point. I presume that in X period of time, we will all pretty much look alike, look the same. But I'd like my colleagues.
But you're addressing two different points, I find. You're addressing stability and speed of change, and I think you need to separate the two, because what we need stability when it comes to financial systems, legislative framework, globally. But what Europe needs a different attitude to change, and that has nothing to do with stability. And that is where Asia has, to a certain extent, and America, a different attitude, that stability has been there or has not been there, but the attitude to change has been totally different. And Europe needs to get its hand around and understand that change is here to stay. Stability we need to bring back, which is what the governments are trying to do to certain elements. But from a business and from an educational standpoint, the speed of change we have to accept as a day of our, as a part of our daily work.
Okay, Stefan, you wanted to add something? Then we have 3 more questions, and then we are out of time. So thank you very much for the participation.
I'm not sure whether Nassim Taleb is in the audience yet. He may disagree with what I'm saying because he basically thinks anything in economic theory is bullshit by definition. But if we historically analyze different societies, those societies that have tried to absolutely curb volatility experience no growth. So it's more about what's the right dose of volatility, and we all have to learn to deal a lot better with volatility. Especially US-based companies have difficulties with adjusting to volatility. Secondly, I think there's a lot of opportunity in chaos. Chaos is one of the most positive forces in the world. You look back, just look back to the internet bubble. Most of the innovation that we're currently benefiting from in this field has happened right after the internet bubble burst. So I think crisis, as painful as it is, as much as it hurts so many people throughout the world, also exerts evolutionary pressure on society and on business to do new things. Okay. And I see so much opportunity in this area.
Innovation. Please.
My name's Keith Tier. Very much following on from the previous question. It feels to me as if this crisis is happening at a moment of structural change. So there's a lot of tactical things that governments are doing to do with the crisis. But at a much higher level, it feels to me as if we're in a period in history where the relationship between China and the rest of the world has reached a tipping point. A little bit like the relationship between Britain and America in the 1930s, and we were seeing a transition of leadership. What are the implications if we are at the beginning of a transition of world leadership for you guys? Do you believe that China is, during, say, the next 50 years, going to become the dominant player in world affairs, and what consequences does that have for you? You know, if we remember that the Ice Age killed the dinosaurs, but it also gave rise to the modern world. My second question is, who are the dinosaurs, and who will be the ones that emerge from this Ice Age?
Good question, great. Who would like to pick up?
I'll take a quick stab at that. I think you're right in many ways. Look, I think as deep as the problems are today, the governments, be they cleansing the bad assets from the banks, putting in fiscal stimulus, this too shall pass. And so I think the broader issues are the structural ones you're talking about. I would not single out China personally as being alone as a power in the future. I think India likewise has enormous possibilities to continue on a sustained basis. They actually have some demographic advantages vis-a-vis China, and they have an enormous level of innovation. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come back to something that was commented on earlier around speed and ability to change. And I think both China and India are actually quite strong on that dimension in differing ways. I think actually the United States, while companies hate volatility and investors hate volatility, has an extraordinarily high entrepreneurial culture vis-a-vis some of the rest of the world. And so I actually think that entrepreneurship is going to be incredibly important moving forward. I think overall, entrepreneurship and innovation is something we all need to embrace. I think Europe needs to embrace it in increasing ways.
And who is going to be the dinosaur? I think this is a very critical part of the question.
I didn't want to call anyone a dinosaur, but I do think someone needs to embrace innovation and entrepreneurship
if Europe doesn't get together, if Europe doesn't get its act together, I think that Europe ends up to be the dinosaur, really. Okay. When you travel to the East and you find the dynamism that exists in the East, and when you travel to the United States and you know exactly what Jim was talking about, which is one of the most flexible cultures that there is, and then you find yourself thinking about Europe, and you have some difficulties. You have some very difficult areas, some very difficult pockets. Now, if we are going to be able as Europeans to change our mind and to stop thinking that I'm Italian and, oh, by the way, I'm part of Europe, but I will start thinking about I'm a European and my origins are Italian, I think that we will operate that change that I think is necessary, and we will be able to influence the European community to dedicate, instead of 30% of the budget to the agricultural thing that is 3% of the total economy, to dedicate 30% of the budget or more to the development of technology, which is going to be the real answer for us to be winners and not dinosaurs. And so I would vote for that formula.
Very quick funny story.
Sure.
Quick funny story. I was in India a year ago, and we were having a discussion, and this is not to pick on any individual country in Europe, but they were talking, Indian business leaders, about the French rule of 35 hours a week at that time. And they sort of scratched their head. They were saying it's very ironic that in some ways it's against the law to work more than 35 hours a week. He said, in India, we're trying to figure out if it's possible to work more than 35 hours a day. So, just different mindsets.
Absolutely. Cultural difference. Please, thank you.
Hi, my name is Mark Goldberg. I have one question on the rising roles of governments. So governments are turning into bailing agents and are globally going to inject roughly $1 trillion into the various industries. So how is that going to affect how business is being run, given that governments are very locally focused on stakeholder and not globally focused on shareholders?
Yeah, Jim, I think you referred to that earlier, but maybe somebody else would like to volunteer.
Maybe it's more interesting for people who have capex-intense industries, but I think it is changing competitiveness significantly. The problem is even with these trillions, they will run out of money in one point in time. So the banks that made it wrong in the first place are saved. The banks that went through the first wave of crisis with their own money may have problems in the second round. And especially in the banking sector, I think there are concerns raised for good reason. But also if you look now into GE, Chrysler, or in Germany, the discussion on the automotive sector, Germany has a strong tradition in supporting the dying sectors, coal mining,
excuse me,
steel industry.
It's GM Chrysler, not GE Chrysler.
GM.
GM, yeah. We don't want to be in that one.
You always understand GE
We don't want to be. It is a general, but it's a different general.
No, I know. I know that.
Stefan, please.
No, but we have a strong tradition, and politicians have a strong tradition to support the old and not to support the new. So you will not find billions or trillions for new economy or for new business or for new ideas. You will find the money for the old ideas that have problems. And that, I think, is slowing down the
throwing
innovation.
Good money at bad things. Stefan?
Governments are stakeholder-oriented, that's absolutely correct. And government stakeholders is usually the electorate. And the electorate is interested in employment, primarily. So I would be very surprised if we didn't see a new wave of protectionism, especially for companies that are mostly into government business, like, for instance, my companies. And we've seen that the Russians and many others right now very openly directly request local manufacturing. Otherwise, you don't get access to that market. We'll see how that will play out, and there are many, many different forces, but I think we would be naive not to assume that.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Please.
To the accelerated pace of change and our intuition as human beings to look at linear progressions instead. So you were potentially referring to Ray Kurzweil's the singularity is near idea. We also heard about increasing democratization of decision making. What we are hearing nowadays is also increasing democratization of innovation. So my question to you, Kasper, is we are seeing increasingly that collaboration networks and innovation are taking pace. We look at Procter & Gamble's Connect and Develop program, Eli Lilly, in the pharma sector as well. Where do you see innovation as a way forward?
First of all, I see from a business standpoint, innovation is the primary driver for revenue growth and profitability. I think that clear to everybody I speak to. In my opinion, innovation, in my opinion, cannot be done in a company. Innovation, lives in a transparent world or in a connected world, and any large organization is naive if that organization believes that you can develop everything within your own structure. So the challenge is, how do you actually create an open, transparent world where you get access to innovation, but at the same time also have a capability to protect IP? So we have global innovation centers all over the world. We work with universities all over the world, but at the same time, we're also trying to get ideas from consumers. And I think if you try to control the entire process all the time, you also narrow your opportunity. So you've got to operate with a certain amount of risk and say, I will operate with a risk gap, from IP standpoint, also will operate with a less structure in certain areas to get new ideas. The last 2 years we had Year of Innovation in Henkel. We got 110,000 ideas from our employees how to improve the company. The point I'm making is innovation is open and it's global, and you got to make certain you use technology to capture all the ideas, but also capture the execution of that. Because some innovation might have one value for one company and different values for different companies.
Okay, I think this is a good point actually to close this discussion, because we are starting to run out of time. So thank you very much for a fantastic set of panel. Thank you very much for the participation. And I just wanted to say one last thing from Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker is an economist from the US, and he actually said, the best way to predict your future is to create it. And I just wanted to leave you with that thought. So thank you very much.